I'm Samantha Mitchell, 28, sitting at my parents' mahogany table while crystal chandeliers witness my humiliation. Dad's venomous question hangs in the air. How does it feel being useless? Mother smirks, brother snickers, sister looks away. Their perfect family portrait minus the disappointment, me. Blood pounds in my ears as years of suppressed rage crystallize into one nuclear sentence. Their smug faces freeze champagne glasses, suspended midair. In that moment, everything changed forever. Before I dive into this wild roller coaster of family betrayal, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button if you've ever had family members underestimate you, and subscribe to join our survivor community. Trust me, you'll want to hear how I turned the tables on the people who should have loved me most. To understand the bomb I dropped at that infamous dinner, you need to know about the Mitchells of Boston. Not just wealthy dynasty, wealthy. My parents, Rebecca and Howard Mitchell, built Mitchell Enterprises from a small consulting firm into a multi-million-dollar empire spanning real estate, finance, and technology. Our family name appears on hospital wings and university buildings. In Boston's elite circles, the Mitchells are royalty. My father, Howard, tall, imposing with steel gray hair and cold blue eyes, rules with an iron fist disguised in Italian suits. A self-made man who reminds everyone of his humble beginnings while simultaneously acting entitled to every luxury. My mother, Rebecca, poised, calculated, with a perpetual Botox smile, orchestrates our family's social status with ruthless precision. The perfect hostess who can deliver a devastating insult wrapped in compliments. Then there are my siblings. Ryan, 32, my father's pride and joy, groomed from childhood to inherit the empire. Harvard Business School naturally. Executive Vice President by 28. The golden son who can do no wrong even when his business trips involve models and cocaine. Ashley, 25, my mother's mini-me, with her perfectly highlighted hair and strategic marriage to Jackson Hughes, heir to the Hughes shipping fortune. Ashley majored in art history, but her real education was in social climbing and manipulation, at which she excels. And then there's me, the middle child. Too outspoken for my mother's taste, too independent for my father's control. I studied marketing at NYU instead of Harvard, my first major disappointment. Then I committed the Cardinal Mitchell sin. I wanted to make it on my own merit. I refused nepotism positions at Mitchell Enterprises and built my own digital marketing consultancy. For 3 years, my business thrived. I worked with startups and small businesses building their brands from nothing. The work was fulfilling, meaningful. I was finally creating my own identity separate from the Mitchell name. Until the economic downturn hit and half my clients had to cut their marketing budgets overnight. Suddenly, at 28, I was facing bankruptcy. My apartment lease in downtown Boston was ending, and with no immediate income, I made the agonizing decision to move back home temporarily. Just until I could rebuild my client base. 6 months maximum, I promised myself as I carried my suitcases past our mansion's grand foyer beneath judging portraits of Mitchell ancestors. The criticism started immediately. Marketing for startups, my father scoffed over breakfast the first week. I told you it wasn't sustainable. Should have taken that VP position I offered. Darling, perhaps this setback is a blessing, my mother suggested, not looking up from her social calendar. You're not getting any younger. Jackson has some lovely single friends. Every dinner became an inquisition about my job prospects, my business plan, my life choices. Nothing I said mattered. They'd already written me off as the family failure. The first real betrayal came through my cousin Diana. We were having coffee when she awkwardly mentioned, "I'm sorry about your issues." My business setback, I asked, confused. Diana shifted uncomfortably. "No, Aunt Rebecca told everyone at the garden club that you're back home because you had a mental breakdown. Something about burnout and emotional instability." My coffee cup froze midway to my mouth. She said, "What?" Diana squeezed my hand. I figured it wasn't true. Rebecca always exaggerates. But this wasn't exaggeration, this was character assassination. My mother was controlling the narrative, ensuring any success I might rebuild would be credited to their support during my mental health crisis. I was being erased and rewritten. That night, I confronted my mother. She waved away my anger with manicured fingers. People need explanations, darling. Failed business sounds so harsh. Mental health struggles are quite sympathetic these days. So you'd rather people think I'm mentally unstable than unsuccessful, I demanded. She sipped her wine. Both are true, aren't they? Look at you right now, overreacting as usual. That was when I realized I wasn't just facing temporary setbacks, I was fighting for my identity against people who'd been undermining it my entire life. Diana became my first real ally, warning me about the family gossip and my parents' efforts to control my narrative. I began documenting everything. Every backhanded comment, every manipulation. Little did I know how crucial this evidence would become. The infamous dinner happened on a Friday in late September, one of those perfect New England autumn evenings when the maple trees blaze red and gold. Mother had insisted on a formal family dinner to boost my spirit's translation, another opportunity to highlight my failures against everyone else's successes. The Mitchell dining room intimidates by design 20-foot ceilings, antique Chippendale furniture, and oil paintings of stern ancestors. The table settings that night featured the heirloom china and crystal that only appeared for special occasions. I should have recognized the warning signs. I dressed carefully in a simple black sheath dress, expensive enough to avoid criticism, but not flashy enough to be accused of wasting money. When I entered the dining room, everyone was already seated. Father at the head of the table, Mother to his right, Ryan beside her, and Ashley beside him, with her fiancé Jackson. The only empty chair was at the opposite end of the table from Father, the seat, traditionally reserved for outsiders or disappointments. Mother's smile tightened when she saw me. "Samantha, darling, you're almost punctual. We were just discussing Ryan's wonderful news." I took my seat, already feeling the familiar pressure building in my chest. "What news is that?" Ryan smirked. "The Shanghai acquisition is finalized. Father's putting me in charge of our entire Asia-Pacific division." "Congratulations," I said, genuinely impressed despite myself. The Shanghai deal had been troubled for months. Father raised his glass. To Ryan, who turned a $40 million potential loss into a $60 million gain. That's the Mitchell business instinct. The implied comparison hung in the air. I reached for my water glass. "Ashley has news too," Mother interjected. "Tell your sister, darling." Ashley extended her left hand where her already massive engagement ring now had a companion, a diamond-encrusted wedding band. "We've set the date. Next June at the Vanderbilt estate. Father and Mother's anniversary gift to us is the down payment on a brownstone in Beacon Hill." How generous I managed, calculating the millions being casually distributed while I'd been lectured about financial responsibility when asking for a small loan to keep my business afloat. As our housekeeper Elaine served the first course, Uncle Jeffrey arrived late, kissing Mother's cheek before taking the seat beside me. "Samantha heard, you're living at home again. Tough break with your little website business." "Digital marketing consultancy," I corrected. "And it's a temporary setback." Uncle Jeffrey patted my hand condescendingly. "Of course it is. You know the administration department at my firm could use someone with your computer skills. Nothing fancy but steady work." I'd built marketing strategies for companies now valued in the millions. My client, Tempest Tech, had been featured in Forbes based on a campaign I designed. But here in this room, I was reduced to computer skills. The main course arrived roast duck with cherry reduction, and the conversation turned to Ashley's wedding. 300 guests custom Vera Wang honeymoon in the Maldives. I pushed food around my plate feeling increasingly invisible. Until Mother turned her attention to me. "Samantha, that dress is quite plain. I left a Neiman Marcus card in your room. You should really update your wardrobe now that you're between ventures." Before I could respond, Father cut in. "Speaking of ventures, Howard Collins asked about you at the club. His marketing director is retiring. I mentioned you might be interested." "Howard Collins' company tests cosmetics on animals," I said. "We've discussed this. I don't want a position through your connections, especially with companies whose values I don't share." Father's face darkened. "Values don't pay bills, Samantha. Pride is a luxury you can't afford right now. I'm rebuilding my client base. I have 3 new accounts this month alone." "Those little coffee shops and boutiques," Ryan laughed. "What's your annual projection from those enough to cover your latte habit?" Ashley joined in. "Honestly, Sam, it's exhausting watching you struggle. Just take Dad's help like a normal person." "Not everyone has your talent for dependency, Ashley," I snapped. The table fell silent. Ashley's face flushed red. "That's enough," Father said quietly, his most dangerous tone. "Ashley and Ryan have embraced their heritage and responsibilities. They understand what it means to be a Mitchell." "And what does that mean exactly?" I challenged, years of resentment bubbling to the surface. "Taking handouts while pretending to be self-made, judging others from positions you didn't earn." Mother's voice cut like ice. "Careful, Samantha. This attitude is precisely why you're failing. You reject guidance, insist on your own path, then blame others when it leads nowhere." "I don't blame anyone for my current situation. The economy affected thousands of businesses. Yet competent owners survive downturns," Father said dismissively. "Perhaps entrepreneurship isn't for everyone." Uncle Jeffrey chuckled. "Not everyone gets the Mitchell business gene, Howard." I gripped my fork tighter. My business was successful for 3 years without any Mitchell connections or capital. "And now it's not," Father stated flatly. He swirled his wine, studying me with cold calculation. "Almost 30 living in your childhood bedroom, no significant other failed business. Tell me, Samantha, how does it feel being useless?" The room went deadly silent. Mother's eyes widened slightly. Even she seemed shocked by Father's cruelty. Ryan stared at his plate. Ashley had the decency to look uncomfortable. In that moment, something broke inside me, or perhaps something finally clicked into place. All the research I'd been doing, all the documents I'd found in Father's home office while searching for my birth certificate last week, the offshore accounts, the tax discrepancies, the shell companies. It all crystallized into one perfect sentence. I looked my father directly in the eyes and said calmly, "I wonder if the IRS would find your Cayman Islands accounts as useless as you find me." The silence that followed was absolute. Father's face drained of color. Mother's wine glass stopped midway to her lips. Ryan's fork clattered against china. Father recovered first. "Everyone out. Now. Except Samantha." As they scrambled to leave, I stood up calmly. "Actually, I'm leaving too. But don't worry, I've made copies of everything. Enjoy your dinner." I walked out with my head high, shaking only when I reached my car. I had just declared war on one of Boston's most powerful families, my own family. And there would be no going back. I barely slept that night, alternating between panic attacks and bursts of empowered rage. By morning, I'd packed my essentials into my car, uncertain where I'd go, but knowing I couldn't stay. As I zipped my last bag, my phone pinged with messages from both Ryan and Ashley demanding I come to the family emergency meeting in Father's study. Instead of joining them, I crept down the service stairs that the housekeeping staff used. These stairs ran behind the walls of the main house, including Father's study. Years of childhood eavesdropping had taught me there was a vent near the bottom of the stairs where conversations from the study carried perfectly. I pressed my ear against the grate and held my breath. A completely unacceptable, Father was shouting. "How did she find those documents? Who's been in my office?" "Howard, lower your voice," Mother hissed. "The staff will hear." "I don't care who hears. Your daughter is threatening me with tax fraud." "She's bluffing," Ryan said confidently. "Sam doesn't understand finance well enough to make sense of those accounts." "Don't underestimate her," Father snapped. "She may lack business sense, but she's always been too clever for her own good." "What if she goes to the authorities?" Ashley's voice trembled. Silence fell, and I could almost picture Father pacing his study hands clasped behind his back as he always did when strategizing. "She won't," he finally said. "She's a Mitchell. Destroying the family name would hurt her as much as us." Ashley's voice turned cold. "Unless she's having another mental episode. We all know Sam's been unstable for years. Remember that breakdown in college?" My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a gasp. My breakdown had been severe pneumonia that hospitalized me for 2 weeks during finals. The family had collectively decided this narrative was less embarrassing than illness. "That's actually useful," Mother said thoughtfully. "If she does try anything, we can claim she's delusional. Having her committed might be the kindest option at this point." My blood turned to ice. They were planning to declare me mentally incompetent if I threatened their secrets. "First, we cut her off," Father decided. "Freeze her accounts, cancel her cards. She'll come crawling back within a week." "And if she doesn't?" Ryan asked. "Then we moved to phase 2. I have colleagues at every major firm in Boston. She won't work in this city again." I'd heard enough. Silently, I crept back upstairs, grabbed my bags, and slipped out through the kitchen door. The ultimate betrayal wasn't just that they were willing to destroy me to protect themselves, it was that they'd been laying groundwork for years, systematically undermining my credibility for exactly this scenario. I checked into a modest hotel downtown using cash and powered up my laptop. If this was war, I needed allies and ammunition. Marcus Cohen had been my classmate at NYU before becoming a forensic accountant for a major firm. We'd stayed friends over the years, occasionally meeting for coffee when he was in Boston. I sent him a carefully worded email asking to meet urgently about potential financial irregularities I've discovered. While waiting for his response, I checked my bank accounts. All 3 had been frozen already, including my personal savings account that had nothing to do with Mitchell Enterprises. When I called the bank, they informed me that as a subsidiary authorized user on the family's master account, my access had been temporarily suspended pending review. Next, I tried my credit cards. All declined. They'd moved even faster than they'd threatened. By afternoon, my hotel room phone rang. The front desk informed me my card had been declined and I needed to provide new payment or vacate. I handed over most of my remaining cash, buying myself 2 more nights. When I returned to my room, a new shock awaited. My primary credit card app showed over $25 0-inches charges from that morning luxury purchases at Saks Tiffany and several high-end electronics stores in New York. Someone had either cloned my card or more likely used the family's banking connections to fabricate charges, making me look like I was on a revenge spending spree. My phone buzzed with Marcus's reply, "Meeting confirmed. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Cambridge Public Library. Too sensitive for office or cafe." That night I documented everything I'd discovered in Father's office, dates, account numbers, company names, and approximate figures. I'd initially been searching for my birth certificate for a passport renewal when I'd stumbled upon a hidden compartment in his desk containing offshore banking documents. What had caught my eye wasn't just the massive sums, it was the pattern of deposits and withdrawals timed perfectly to avoid reporting requirements. Marcus arrived at our meeting spot looking nervous but determined. After I explained the situation, he whistled softly. "You've kicked a hornet's nest, Sam. The Mitchells aren't just wealthy, they're connected. If what you've found is real, it's not just tax evasion, it's potentially money laundering. Can you help me make sense of what I found?" He nodded slowly. "I can, but you need to understand the risk. These documents alone won't be enough. We'd need to establish patterns, prove intent. And during that time, they'll come after you with everything they have." "They already are," I said, grimly showing him my frozen accounts and fraudulent charges. "This is just the beginning," he warned. "If I were you, I'd secure any evidence immediately. Create backups. Find somewhere safe to stay that they can't trace." On my way back to the hotel, Diana called. "Sam, what the hell happened? The family is saying you had some kind of meltdown at dinner and threatened everyone." I laughed bitterly. "Let me guess, another mental episode." "That's exactly what your mom called it. She's telling everyone you accused your dad of tax fraud because you're having delusions of persecution. And you believe that?" Diana paused. "No. That's why I'm calling. You can stay with me until you figure things out." I nearly wept with relief. "Thank you, Diana. I'll be there tonight." I had just finished checking out when my phone exploded with notifications. Friends and acquaintances were messaging about my concerning posts on social media. I opened Instagram to find my account had shared designer clothing purchases with captions like "retail therapy," "courtesy of daddy's credit card," and "who needs a business when you can just spend family money." Someone had hacked my accounts and was now publicly corroborating the narrative that I was having a breakdown and spending family money in revenge. When I arrived at Diana's apartment with my meager belongings, she hugged me tightly. "Whatever's happening, I'm on your side." I didn't tell her about the documents. The fewer people who knew, the better. But having a safe place to sleep was the first small victory in what I was beginning to realize would be a long and ugly battle. What I didn't know then was that the Mitchell family was just warming up. 1 week after the dinner confrontation, I was starting to rebuild. Diana's guest room became my command center. Marcus helped me secure new bank accounts under just my name at a credit union with no Mitchell connections. I'd reached out to my most loyal clients, explaining I was dealing with family issues and working remotely. Then the official letter arrived. Notice of eviction read the heading of the legal document. The downtown apartment I'd been renting, which I'd moved out of when returning to my parents' home, was apparently owned by a subsidiary of Mitchell Properties. Despite my lease having 3 months remaining, I was being evicted for violation of terms, including unauthorized business activities and property damage. I hadn't even been living there for the past month. The next morning, as I was sorting through which possessions I could salvage from the apartment, the doorbell rang. Ryan stood there in his perfect suit, 2 security guards flanking him. "Hello, sister dear," he said with a cold smile. "I've been appointed to oversee the recovery of company property." "What company property?" I demanded. "This is my personal apartment." He brushed past me. "The lease agreement you signed was with Mitchell Residential Holdings. Everything here belongs to the company, including, apparently, that laptop." He pointed to my personal MacBook on the kitchen counter. "That's my personal computer," I protested. "Purchased with my own money from my business." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Can you prove that?" "Because our records show a Mitchell Enterprises equipment purchase matching that exact model and serial number last year." They had falsified records. I realized with growing horror that they were going to take everything. "You're my brother," I said quietly. "How can you do this?" Something flickered across Ryan's face, doubt, perhaps, or shame, but it vanished instantly. "You threatened the family, Sam. there are consequences. I managed to salvage some clothes and personal items, but they confiscated my laptop, external hard drives, and even my professional camera, claiming all were company assets. Thank God I'd left my documents with Marcus. Back at Diana's, I broke down. They're erasing me piece by piece. Diana made tea and helped me take inventory of what remained. You can rebuild, Sam. You've done it before. But the Mitchells were just getting started. The next day, a sheriff delivered papers, a temporary restraining order filed by my parents, claiming I had made violent threats and displayed erratic behavior consistent with psychosis. The evidence doctored text messages showing me threatening to destroy everything you love and witnesses who allegedly saw me surveilling the family home at odd hours. I hadn't been within miles of their house. Marcus examined the papers grimly. This is about limiting your movements and legitimizing their narrative that you're unstable. The hearing is in 2 weeks. We need to prepare. Meanwhile, I discovered the true extent of my father's influence when 3 potential job interviews suddenly canceled without explanation. A former colleague let slip that Howard Mitchell had been calling associates throughout Boston's business community. He's telling everyone you had a psychotic break and stole sensitive documents while delusional, my friend whispered over the phone. No one wants to risk crossing him. My remaining clients began receiving anonymous emails detailing my mental health crisis and ongoing legal troubles. Within days, 2 major contracts canceled. 3 more needed to pause our relationship until your personal issues are resolved. I was being systematically isolated and discredited. The final blow came when Diana returned home ashen-faced one evening. Your mother called me, she admitted, unable to meet my eyes. She said they're worried about me harboring you, that I could face liability if you hurt yourself or others while staying here. She twisted her hands anxiously. My parents are pressuring me too. They rely on Uncle Howard for so much. My heart sank. They're threatening your family. I'm so sorry, Sam. I need more time to figure this out, but... Her voice trailed off. I need to find somewhere else to stay. I finished for her. That night, after Diana had gone to bed, I discovered someone had accessed my email and sent inappropriate threatening messages to my remaining clients. Each message ended with, "Don't bother replying, I've moved on to better opportunities with Daddy's money." I changed all my passwords immediately, but the damage was done. By morning, my client list was empty. Checking my bank account, I found it frozen again, this time with a fraud investigation pending. Somehow, they'd reported suspicious activities on my new account. I sat on Diana's guest bed, surrounded by the few possessions I had left, and contemplated surrender. Maybe if I apologized, returned the documents, agreed to their version of events, they would allow me some small dignity in defeat. My phone rang with an unknown number. Expecting another blow, I almost didn't answer. Samantha Mitchell, a gruff voice, asked when I finally picked up. Yes, this is Thomas Walker. I was your family's chauffeur for 15 years until they dismissed me last month. I vaguely remembered Thomas, a quiet, dignified man who had driven us to countless events. They fired you. Why? He chuckled darkly. Officially, budget cuts. Unofficially, I overheard your father discussing certain financial arrangements he preferred remain private. My pulse quickened. Why are you calling me? Because they're doing to you what they did to me, erasing you. And because I've been keeping records of my own for years. Insurance, you might say. I think we could help each other. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. The tide was about to turn. Thomas Walker turned out to be far more than just a chauffeur. For 15 years, he had been an invisible presence in the Mitchell family's daily life, driving them to meetings, waiting outside offices, overhearing conversations they assumed no one important was listening to. Your father never considered the help to be people, Thomas explained as we sat in a quiet corner of a Cambridge coffee shop. We were furniture to him. Useful objects that didn't have ears or opinions. What Thomas had were copies, hundreds of them. Photographs of documents taken while waiting in Howard's study. Audio recordings of conversations in the car when they'd forgotten to raise the privacy partition. Notes of meetings, dates, names. I never planned to use any of this, he said, sliding a flash drive across the table. It was just protection in case they ever tried to frame me for something. But when I heard what they're doing to you, the drive contained evidence far beyond what I'd discovered. Not just tax evasion, but systematic fraud, blackmail of business competitors and political bribery going back decades. Why help me? I asked. They could destroy you too. Thomas's weathered face hardened. Your father cheated me out of my pension after 15 years of loyal service. Your mother suggested I was stealing from them when I questioned it. I have cancer, Miss Mitchell. Terminal. They knew that when they cut me off from my health insurance. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry. Be smart, be careful, and make them pay not just for you or me, but for everyone they've stepped on. With Marcus's help, I created multiple secure backups of all our evidence. We established a digital deadman switch. If I didn't check in every 72 hours, the information would automatically be sent to the FBI, IRS, and several investigative journalists. My next move was Diana. I invited her for coffee at a public park away from any possibility of the apartment being bugged. They're watching you, I said, without preamble. Diana blanched. What do you mean? The Mitchells. They're monitoring your movements, your calls. You're their link to me. How do you know this? I showed her a surveillance photo Thomas had provided one of Howard's security team parked outside her apartment building. Oh my God, she whispered. I don't blame you for being scared, I assured her. I'm going to find another place to stay. But first, I need you to help me with something. I explained my plan. Diana would continue acting normally but feed false information during her worried calls with my mother. Meanwhile, I would move to a location only Thomas knew about, a small apartment belonging to his niece who was studying abroad. With a safe base established, I launched my first counterattack. Marcus had identified a critical vulnerability. Wayland Industries, my father's largest competitor, had been trying to acquire a specific manufacturing company that Mitchell Enterprises had mysteriously outbid them on despite offering less money. Using Thomas's evidence, I anonymously sent Wayland proof that my father had blackmailed a board member of the target company. Within days, Wayland's lawyers had initiated proceedings that froze the acquisition and triggered a broader investigation. The financial press swarmed. Mitchell Enterprises stock dropped 12% in a single day. My father was forced to make public statements denying impropriety. That evening, my mother called. Samantha, darling, she began, her voice honey sweet. We need to talk. About what, mother? This misunderstanding has gone on long enough. Your father and I are concerned about you. These accusations, these documents, you think you found. Honey, they're not what you think. Then what are they? She sighed dramatically. Complex business matters you've misinterpreted. Your father can explain everything if you'll just come home. We miss you, sweetheart. The manipulation was so transparent, it was almost laughable. Is that why you froze my accounts? Filed a restraining order? Destroyed my business? We were desperate, darling. You weren't answering our calls. We needed to get your attention before you did something rash. Like expose father's crimes. There are no crimes, she insisted, voice hardening slightly. Just business practices you don't understand. Come home, Samantha. We can work this out as a family. I'll think about it, I lied and hung up. Later that night, my sister Ashley called. Her approach was different, seemingly vulnerable. Sam, things have gotten out of control, she said, sounding tearful. Mom and Dad are freaking out. Ryan's drinking again. Please, can we meet? Just you and me. Despite every instinct screaming trap, I agreed to meet Ashley at a public restaurant the following day. I arrived early, chose a table with a clear view of all entrances, and waited. Ashley entered alone, looking genuinely stressed. After ordering coffee, she leaned forward. I had no idea they would go this far, she whispered. The restraining order, the job blacklisting, that wasn't what we agreed to in the meeting. What did you agree to? Just to cut off your access to family funds until you returned the documents. Everything else was Dad and Ryan's idea. Her eyes welled with tears. We're still sisters, Sam. For a moment, I almost believed her. Then I noticed she had placed her purse unusually close to my laptop. Can I use your bathroom? Ashley asked. Of course. The moment she left, I checked her purse. Inside was a small electronic device, a hacking tool designed to install spyware on nearby computers. I quickly wrapped it in napkins and slipped it into my pocket. When Ashley returned, I pretended nothing had happened, agreeing vaguely to think about her suggestion to meet with our parents. We parted with an awkward hug. Marcus confirmed my suspicions the device would have installed sophisticated monitoring software on my laptop, giving them access to everything: emails, documents, passwords. They're getting desperate, he observed. This is good news. But the Mitchells still had cards to play. 2 days later, I was served with legal papers. Ashley's fiancé Jackson, a corporate attorney from a prestigious firm, had filed a civil suit against me alleging theft of proprietary information and defamation of character. This is their second Chiu, Marcus explained. A legal stranglehold. They're trying to force you to surrender the documents during discovery while simultaneously draining whatever financial resources you have left fighting the suit. I kept up appearances of being wounded and retreating while secretly strengthening my position. Thomas introduced me to former Mitchell Enterprises employees who had similar stories of mistreatment. Marcus secured affidavits from financial experts confirming the suspicious patterns in the documents I had. But just as momentum was building, disaster struck. Walking back to my secret apartment one evening, a car swerved onto the sidewalk, missing me by inches before speeding away. The message was clear: they knew where I was, and the stakes had escalated to potential physical harm. That night, shaken and sleepless, I wondered if any victory could be worth this level of fear and isolation. The Mitchells weren't just powerful, they were ruthless. And they were closing in. The near miss with the car left me paranoid and hypervigilant. I moved again immediately, this time to a small motel on the outskirts of Boston that accepted cash payments. I limited my movements, used public transportation instead of ride shares that could be traced, and switched to a prepaid phone. Meanwhile, Marcus discovered Ashley's spyware attempt had a silver lining. Using specialized software, we deliberately infected one of my old laptops and fed it carefully crafted misinformation, fake meeting locations, made-up evidence locations, and a fabricated plan to leave Boston. They're watching the fake breadcrumbs, Marcus confirmed after monitoring the digital activity. Your father's security team has been dispatched to 3 different wild goose chases this week. While they chased shadows, I pursued a question that had been nagging at me since this conflict began. Why were my parents so different with me than with my siblings? The disparity in treatment had always been evident, but the viciousness of their current campaign seemed disproportionate, even accounting for the threat I posed. I needed my birth certificate, not the copy I'd been using, but the original. The Mitchells were too careful to leave such documents in their home office. After considerable thought, I remembered my mother once mentioning that important family papers were kept in a safe deposit box at Boston First National, the same bank where the family had done business for generations. Accessing it directly was impossible. But Thomas had one more card to play: Miranda Phillips, who had been my mother's personal assistant for 8 years before being abruptly dismissed last year. Rebecca Mitchell treats assistants like disposable tissues, Miranda said when we met. Use until worn out, then discard. After 8 years of 24/7 availability, she fired me for taking one day off when my father had a heart attack. Miranda still had a copy of my mother's planner, including safe deposit box access dates. More importantly, she knew the bank manager who handled the Mitchell accounts. James and I dated briefly, she explained with a small smile. He's no fan of your father either. Howard threatened to pull the Mitchell accounts when James wouldn't approve a loan for one of Howard's friends with terrible credit. It took a week of careful planning. James couldn't directly access the box, but he could tell us when my mother next visited. On a Tuesday morning, Miranda texted Bird in Nest 20 minutes window. I hurried to the bank wearing a blonde wig, sunglasses, and business attire similar to what my mother typically wore. The risk was enormous if caught. I could face criminal charges, but I had to know the truth. James created a diversion that kept my mother in a meeting room while I was escorted to the vault by another employee. My hands trembled as I used the key Miranda had duplicated years ago as backup for my mother. Inside the box were property deeds, stock certificates, my father's second passport, and a sealed envelope marked S.M. Adoption. Adoption. My heart froze. I quickly photographed everything with my phone before replacing the contents and leaving as quickly as possible. I was halfway to the exit when I spotted my mother in the lobby. I ducked into a bathroom, waited 10 excruciating minutes, then slipped out a side entrance. Back in my motel room, I enlarged the photos. The documents confirmed what I'd suspected but never dared voice I was adopted. But it was the specifics that shattered my world. My biological father was Charles Westfield, my father's original business partner, who had mysteriously sold his share of the company for a fraction of its worth before disappearing from Boston society. My biological mother was listed as Elizabeth Westfield, who had died in childbirth. Further documents revealed a complex legal agreement. Charles had surrendered his company shares and signed a non-disclosure agreement in exchange for the Mitchells adopting his newborn daughter. A handwritten note in the margin of one document read, "Insurance policy if CW ever returns." I was never a daughter to them. I was collateral. When I called Marcus to share my discovery, he was silent for a long moment. Sam, do you realize what this might mean legally? If your biological father was coerced into surrendering his company shares, then those shares might rightfully belong to me as his heir, I finished. It's complicated and would depend on the exact terms, but it's worth investigating. We need to find Charles Westfield. Finding someone who had essentially disappeared 28 years ago wasn't easy, but Miranda came through again. Through her society connections, she located a retired attorney named Gerald Hoffman, who had worked with both Howard Mitchell and Charles Westfield during the company's early days. Hoffman, now in his 70s and beyond, caring about the Mitchells' influence, agreed to meet me. "I always wondered when you'd come looking for answers," he said, studying my face. "You have your father's eyes, Charles's eyes. What happened between Charles Westfield and Howard Mitchell?" I asked. Hoffman sighed. They were brilliant together at first. Charles was the innovator, Howard the businessman. But Howard wanted total control. When Elizabeth died giving birth to you, Charles was devastated. Howard offered to have Rebecca raise you as their own if Charles would step away from the company. Charles initially refused. What changed his mind? Howard had evidence fabricated. I always suspected that Charles had been embezzling from the company. He threatened criminal charges unless Charles signed over his shares and gave up all parental rights to you. With Elizabeth gone and facing potential imprisonment, Charles felt he had no choice. Do you know where he is now? Last I heard, about 10 years ago, he was teaching engineering at a university in Arizona. He never remarried, never started another company. I felt tears forming. Did he ever try to contact me? Hoffman nodded slowly. The agreement had strict non-contact provisions with severe financial penalties. But on your 18th birthday, he sent a letter through my office. Howard intercepted it somehow. After that, Charles stopped trying, or at least stopped trying through, means the Mitchells could track. As I processed this revelation, my phone buzzed with an urgent message from Marcus Emergency. Apartment compromised. Don't return. Meet at backup location. When I arrived at our designated emergency meeting spot, a 24-hour diner in a busy part of the city, Marcus looked grim. They found your location. Your laptop, the external hard drives with our backup evidence, everything's gone. How I was so careful. Not Diana, he said, seeing my first suspicion. Remember, when your sister tried to install spyware, I think they did get access to something. Not your main devices, but maybe an old cloud account or email you forgot to change passwords on. They've been watching longer than we realized. It got worse. That evening, Marcus's apartment was broken into. His computer backup drives and all hard copies of our evidence were taken. The only thing the thieves left behind was a Mitchell Enterprises business card on his kitchen counter. We had copies of the adoption documents and some of Thomas's records secured in a cloud account, but our most compelling evidence, the detailed financial records, the recorded conversations, the signed affidavits from former employees, was gone. What do we do now? I asked, feeling defeat creeping in again. They think they've won, Marcus said. That's their mistake. They believe they've recovered all the evidence and neutralized all threats. They'll get sloppy. But I wasn't convinced. The stress of the past weeks suddenly crashed over me like a wave. That night in yet another cheap motel room, my body finally rebelled. Fever chills, complete exhaustion. I could barely get out of bed for 3 days. Thomas brought medication and food, but his own health was failing rapidly. Marcus was being followed everywhere he went, effectively neutralized. Even Gerald Hoffman called to say he'd received a friendly visit from Howard's attorneys. For the second time, I contemplated surrender. The Mitchells had more resources, more connections, more stamina. They could outlast me, outspend me, outmaneuver me. I was so close to giving up when my prepaid phone rang. An unfamiliar voice said just 7 words: Charles Westfield, University of Arizona. Engineering Department. Tomorrow. Then the line went dead. The call about Charles Westfield came from Gerald Hoffman's assistant, as I later discovered. The elderly lawyer had suffered a minor heart attack after the Mitchell attorney's friendly visit, but had instructed his assistant to get me this crucial information before hospital staff confiscated his phone. Despite my weakened state and the obvious risks of travel, I knew this might be my only chance to connect with my biological father. Marcus strongly objected. It's exactly what they expect you to do, he argued. They've cut off all your other avenues. They know you'll go to Westfield next. Then I'll be careful, I insisted. I'll take every precaution. I purchased a bus ticket under a false name using cash, wore a different disguise than before, and took a circuitous route to the airport. There, I bought a last-minute ticket to Phoenix using ID Marcus had helped me obtain through one of his less reputable connections. During the flight, I sorted through the few pieces of evidence we still had. The adoption papers proved my connection to Charles Westfield, but without the financial records and other documentation, we couldn't prove coercion or fraud in the original company takeover. I needed Charles's testimony and any evidence he might have preserved. The University of Arizona campus sprawled under the brutal desert Sunday. The engineering department was housed in a modern building of glass and sandstone. My heart pounded as I approached the departmental office and asked for Professor Westfield. He's teaching until noon, the administrative assistant informed me. You can wait in the hallway outside Lecture Hall C. I found the hall and peered through the small window in the door. At the front of the classroom stood a tall man with silver hair and beard, energetically explaining a complex diagram on the whiteboard. Even from a distance, I could see what Hoffman had meant. We had the same eyes. When class ended, I waited until the students had filed out before entering the hall. Charles Westfield was gathering his papers, his back to me. Professor Westfield. He turned, his expression professionally neutral. Yes, office hours aren't until hins an. The words died on his lips as he saw my face. The papers slipped from his hands, scattering across the floor. Samantha, he whispered, not a question but a recognition so profound it brought tears to my eyes. How did you know? I asked. I've followed your life from a distance. College graduations, news, mentions of Mitchell events. I could never contact you, but I watched. When you're told for 28 years that someone shares your blood, you look for yourself in them. I never saw myself in you, though. Rebecca did have dark hair like yours before she started dyeing it. We moved to his office, a cluttered space filled with books and engineering models. For over an hour, I explained everything: the confrontation with Howard, the financial discoveries, the adoption revelation, the Mitchells' campaign against me. Charles listened intently, occasionally closing his eyes as particularly painful details emerged. When I finished, he opened a drawer in his desk and removed a thumb drive. I've been waiting for this day, he said quietly. Howard Mitchell didn't just steal my company and my daughter. He stole my life's work, my patents, my future. When Elizabeth died, I was destroyed. Howard used my grief against me, made me believe I was in no position to raise a child alone. The evidence of embezzlement was completely fabricated, but by the time I realized that the agreements were signed, the thumb drive contained everything Charles had collected over decades: copies of the original partnership agreements, patent applications with his name, mysteriously removed correspondence with lawyers who ultimately refused to take his case against the powerful Mitchells. Most importantly, it contained a copy of the original incorporation documents for Mitchell Westfield Enterprises, which included a clause that would prove pivotal in the event of the death or incapacitation of either founding partner. Their ownership stake shall transfer to their legal heirs. Howard had this clause removed from later versions of the company documents, Charles explained. But the original filed with the state still contains it. When Elizabeth died and I was forced out, my shares should have been held in trust for you, not surrendered to Howard. So legally, you own 25% of Mitchell Enterprises. Or rather, you should. Proving it after all these years won't be easy, but the documentation exists. Armed with this new evidence, I flew back to Boston the next day. Charles wanted to come with me, but I insisted he stay behind. Having us both in Boston would make us easier targets. Instead, he agreed to prepare a comprehensive affidavit and be ready to testify if needed. Back in Boston, I found Thomas had made a crucial connection through his network of service workers, Judith Braun, who had been my birth father's attorney during the original company dispute. Though long retired, she had kept personal notes from the case, including details of how Howard had manipulated and threatened Charles. With Charles's evidence and Judith's testimony, we now had enough to approach the Mitchell Enterprises board of directors directly. Marcus identified 2 board members with reputations for integrity who had occasionally opposed Howard's more aggressive tactics. I arranged private meetings with each of them, carefully presenting our evidence without making explicit threats. Their reactions were telling: concern, not dismissal. One even admitted he'd had suspicions about Howard's financial practices for years but lacked concrete proof. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my business with clients outside Boston, beyond my father's immediate influence. A tech startup in Seattle became my first new client, followed by a sustainable fashion brand in Portland. Working remotely, I slowly re-established my reputation and financial independence. The Mitchells, realizing I hadn't fled as expected, made one final attempt at reconciliation, this time orchestrated by my mother, who arranged to accidentally encounter me at my favorite coffee shop. "Darling, this has all gone too far," she said, sliding into the seat across from me without invitation. "Your father is willing to forget everything, the documents, the accusations, all of it. We want our daughter back." "I was never your daughter," I replied calmly. "I was an insurance policy against Charles Westfield." She blanched slightly before recovering. "That's not true. We loved you. We still love you. Is that why you tried to have me declared mentally incompetent? Why you destroyed my business? Why Father's security team has been following me for weeks?" "Mistakes were made on all sides," she conceded, reaching for my hand. I pulled away. "But we can start fresh. Your father is prepared to be generous. A division of the company you could run independently. A trust fund. A clean slate." I studied her face, the perfect makeup, the practiced concern, the complete absence of genuine emotion. "I'll consider it," I said, knowing she would interpret my response as weakness or surrender. She smiled triumphantly. "Come to dinner tomorrow night, just family. We can discuss the details." I agreed, already planning my approach. This time I would be fully prepared. The next evening, I arrived at the Mitchell mansion for the first time since the disastrous dinner weeks before. The same dining room, the same elaborate table setting, the same family members arranged in their usual positions. The only difference was the tension thrumming beneath the forced smiles. My father stood to welcome me, ever the patriarch. "Samantha, we're glad you've come to your senses." I took my seat calmly. "I'm here to listen to your proposal." Mother beamed at father. "See, Howard, I told you she would be reasonable." Throughout the elaborate meal, they outlined their generous offer, a minor division of the company to run a monthly allowance, a new apartment. All I had to do was sign some paperwork they had prepared, surrendering any claims related to my misunderstanding of the company structure and my adoption. As dessert was served, father slid the documents across the table. "Just a formality. Our attorneys thought it best to make everything official." I smiled and reached into my bag, pulling out a small recording device and placing it beside my plate. "Before I sign anything, I think you should know this dinner is being recorded." The room went silent. Mother's dessert fork froze midway to her mouth. "I also think you should know that I've met with Charles Westfield, my biological father, and with Judith Braun, his former attorney, and with 2 members of your board of directors." Father's face darkened dangerously. "You've been busy." "I've been thorough," I corrected. "I've also been in discussion with the Securities and Exchange Commission regarding certain irregularities in Mitchell Enterprises' financial reporting." "You would destroy this family," Mother gasped theatrically. "You were never my family. You made that abundantly clear." I stood up, gathering my things. "I'll be presenting my evidence and legal claim to my rightful shares at next month's board meeting. My attorneys will be in touch regarding the adoption fraud and financial misconduct." Ryan, who had been silent throughout dinner, suddenly spoke. "What evidence?" "We recovered everything from your apartment and from Cohen's place." I smiled. "Not everything. And that admission of theft will make a nice addition to the recording." As I turned to leave, Ashley called out desperately, "You'll regret this, Sam. You think you can beat us. We're the Mitchells." "No," I said, pausing at the doorway. "You're the Mitchells. I'm a Westfield. And I'm just getting started." The door closed behind me on their stunned faces, and for the first time since this battle began, I felt not just determined, but victorious. The month between the family dinner and the board meeting was strangely quiet. The Mitchells made no further attempts to contact me, though their investigators continued surveillance. I used the time to solidify my position, gathering additional documentation and preparing my legal strategy with a team of attorneys Charles Westfield had helped me assemble. The Mitchell Enterprises headquarters occupied a gleaming tower in downtown Boston, its lobby dominated by a massive portrait of Howard Mitchell. I had attended events here as a teenager, always feeling like an outsider despite the Mitchell name. Now I was returning as a declared enemy. Security had instructions to admit me to the executive floor, where the monthly board meeting was already in progress. As I entered the boardroom, conversations halted. 12 people sat around a polished mahogany table, 10 board members, Howard at the head, and a corporate attorney I recognized as Wilson Green, the firm's general counsel. Miss Mitchell Green began, "This is a closed board meeting. While your father has permitted you to address the board briefly, I must insist." "It's Miss Westfield, actually," I corrected, setting my briefcase on the table. "And I have a right to be here as a shareholder." Howard's laugh was dismissive. "You are not a shareholder of Mitchell Enterprises. That's item 1 on my agenda today." I distributed folders to each board member. "You'll find copies of the original incorporation documents for Mitchell Westfield Enterprises highlighting the succession clause regarding ownership stakes transferring to legal heirs." Board members began examining the documents with increasing interest. Howard slammed his hand on the table. "This is absurd. Those documents were superseded decades ago when Charles Westfield voluntarily surrendered his ownership stake." Voluntarily, I raised an eyebrow. "That's item 2 in your folders, Charles Westfield's sworn affidavit detailing the coercion and fraudulent claims used to force him to surrender both his company shares and his parental rights." I turned to the board members. Mr. Westfield was threatened with fabricated criminal charges while grieving the death of his wife, my biological mother. The boardroom erupted in murmurs. Howard's face flushed dark red as he struggled to maintain control. "Even if there were irregularities in those old agreements, which I categorically deny, the statute of limitations has long expired," Green interjected smoothly. "For some claims, yes, I acknowledged, but not for ongoing fraud, which brings me to item 3, the offshore accounts, tax evasion schemes, and financial misrepresentations that have continued under Ms. Mitchell's leadership to this day." The boardroom door opened, and my mother swept in perfectly composed except for the tight line of her lips. "I apologize for my tardiness," she said, taking a seat beside Howard. "I see our daughter is indulging in her delusions again." Mrs. Mitchell, one nodded. "Perfect timing." Item 4 addresses your role in the adoption fraud and subsequent efforts to have me declared mentally incompetent when I discovered the truth. Several board members exchanged alarmed glances. Eleanor Blackwell, the most senior member, cleared her throat. "These are extremely serious allegations, Howard. If even a fraction of this is true—" "It's all fabricated," Howard roared, standing abruptly. "This is exactly what I warned you about. Samantha has been unstable for years. She lost her business, suffered some kind of breakdown, and is now lashing out with these ridiculous claims. Actually, I countered calmly, my business is thriving again despite your extensive efforts to destroy it." Which brings me to item 5, witness statements from former employees, detailing how Mitchell Enterprises engaged in corporate sabotage, identity theft, and defamation to discredit me. The door opened again, and Ryan entered, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. "Sorry I'm late." Traffic was. He stopped short seeing me, then took a seat as far from Howard as possible. Howard glared at him. "Where's Ashley? She was supposed to be here with Jackson to address the legal aspects." Ryan avoided his father's eyes. "She's not coming. Neither is Jackson." "What do you mean, not coming?" Rebecca hissed. "Jackson reviewed Samantha's documentation last night," Ryan said quietly. He advised Ashley to distance herself from this situation." They've flown to their place in the Hamptons. A tremor of satisfaction ran through me at this first crack in the Mitchell United front. Howard looked momentarily lost before his face hardened again. This is preposterous. Whatever evidence Samantha claims to have was stolen from my private office and manipulated to— So you admit the documents existed, Eleanor Blackwell interrupted sharply. Howard faltered. That's not what I— Item 6. I continued addresses the Mitchell family's recent activities, freezing my accounts, filing false reports with banks creating fraudulent credit card charges in my name, stealing my property and filing baseless legal actions, all documented with timestamps, witnesses, and in some cases, recordings. The boardroom had grown increasingly tense as I methodically presented my case. Several board members were now openly concerned, whispering among themselves. "What exactly are you seeking here?" Green asked, attempting to regain control of the situation. Recognition of my rightful 25% ownership of Mitchell Enterprises, complete cessation of all harassment and defamation activities, and an independent audit of the company's finances, I stated clearly. If these conditions are met, I'm prepared to handle this matter privately without involving regulatory authorities. This is blackmail, Howard seethed. No, Father, this is negotiation. Blackmail is what you did to Charles Westfield 28 years ago. Rebecca suddenly stood up, her carefully constructed composure cracking. You ungrateful, spiteful girl. After everything we've done for you, we took you in when nobody wanted you. We gave you the Mitchell name, the best schools, every advantage. You took me as collateral against my real father, I corrected. You never wanted me. You wanted to ensure his silence and compliance. That's not true, she cried, but her eyes darted away. We chose you. We loved you. Is that why you told everyone I was mentally ill? When I discovered the truth, why you participated in destroying everything I built independently? Mother's facade collapsed completely. You were never satisfied with anything we gave you, always questioning, challenging, refusing to simply accept your place in this family. Ryan and Ashley understood what was expected of them. The board members watched in stunned silence as Rebecca Mitchell, Boston's most poised socialite, completely unraveled. You were supposed to be grateful, she continued, voice rising hysterically. Instead, you rejected everything the Mitchell name offered you. Rebecca, that's enough, Howard cut in sharply. But she was beyond his control now. It was your idea to take her, Howard. I never wanted another man's child, but you insisted it was the perfect solution, controlling Charles and his patents while appearing philanthropic to Boston society. The boardroom fell silent. Howard stared at his wife in disbelief at her public admission. Eleanor Blackwell broke the silence. I believe the board needs to discuss these matters privately. Miss Westfield, Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, if you would give us the room. As we filed out, Ryan caught up with me in the hallway. Sam, wait, he said, glancing nervously over his shoulder. There's something you should know. We stepped into an empty conference room. I didn't know about any of this, the adoption, the coercion, any of it, he said quickly. I just found out last week when Father started liquidating personal assets and making unusual transfers. I studied my brother's face skeptically. You participated in evicting me from my apartment. You took my possessions. He had the grace to look ashamed. I know. I've been Father's puppet for so long, I stopped questioning anything. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. But when I saw what they were willing to do to you, their own daughter or so, I thought I started wondering what they might someday do to me if I ever stepped out of line. Why are you telling me this? Because I have access to Father's personal server. The one in the house, not at the office. He handed me a flash drive. There's more, much more. Things even you don't know about yet. I took the drive cautiously. Why would you betray him now? Ryan's laugh was hollow. Self-preservation. The board will demand a sacrifice after today. Father will try to blame everything on underlings or claim ignorance. This, he gestured to the drive, ensures he can't scapegoat me in the process. 3 hours later, the board reached its decision. An emergency executive session was called with only key participants, myself, Howard, and Rebecca, the general counsel, and the board leadership. Eleanor Blackwell delivered the verdict. The board finds Miss Westfield's claims credible enough to warrant immediate action. We are authorizing an independent forensic audit of all company finances and operations. During this process, Howard Mitchell will take a leave of absence as CEO. Howard began to protest, but she continued firmly. Additionally, the board acknowledges the legitimacy of Miss Westfield's inheritance claim. Pending final legal determination, we are recognizing her provisional status as a 25% shareholder with all associated rights. This is outrageous, Howard growled. I built this company. Without me, there is no Mitchell Enterprises. Without Charles Westfield's innovations, there would be no company to build, I countered. You've had 28 years of profits from his work. That ends today. The final negotiations were tense but definitive. Beyond the board's decisions, we reached a private settlement. The Mitchells would cease all personal attacks and acknowledge my position publicly, or I would take the evidence to federal authorities. Additionally, I would lead a newly created division focused on ethical innovation, returning to Charles Westfield's original vision for the company. As we prepared to leave, Howard made one final desperate attempt to regain control. There's one more thing the board should know about Samantha before finalizing any agreements, he said with a cold smile. Her relationship with Marcus Cohen goes beyond professional. He's been manipulating her, using her vendetta for his own purposes. It was their last Huichio attempting to discredit me by suggesting I was being manipulated by a man playing into old-fashioned prejudices that still lingered in corporate America. Instead of denying it or becoming defensive, I smiled. Marcus Cohen is indeed a close friend who helped me when you tried to destroy me. As for manipulation, I've had enough of that from the Mitchell family to recognize it instantly in others. The difference is I chose my allies. I was forced into being your daughter. I gathered my papers calmly. Unlike you, I don't discard people who help me. Unlike you, I don't measure people's worth by their usefulness. And unlike you, I don't need to destroy others to succeed. Howard Mitchell, the titan of Boston business, had nothing left to say. For the first time in my life, I saw something I never thought possible in his eyes: defeat. As I walked out of Mitchell Enterprises headquarters that day, I was no longer the family disappointment or the unwanted adopted daughter. I was Samantha Westfield, rightful heir and shareholder architect of my own vindication. The war was over, and I had won. 6 months after the board meeting that changed everything, I stood at the window of my new office on the 22nd floor of the Mitchell Westfield Enterprises building. Yes, the company had formally returned to its original name as part of the settlement. Boston spread before me, autumn painting the public garden in fiery colors. On my desk sat a framed photo of Charles Westfield and me, taken during his first visit back to Boston in 28 years. The transition hadn't been easy. The independent audit revealed financial irregularities even more extensive than we'd initially discovered. Howard Mitchell was formally removed as CEO, though he retained his shares and a ceremonial board position that kept him away from day-to-day operations. Rebecca retreated to their estate in Martha's Vineyard, making rare, carefully choreographed appearances to maintain social standing. I now led the Innovation Division, a substantial segment of the company focused on returning to Charles Westfield's original vision of ethical technology development. My biological father served as a special advisor, bringing decades of academic research back into the corporate world. We'd developed a close relationship navigating the complexities of being parent and child while simultaneously colleagues. The lost years couldn't be recovered, but we were building something new together, something honest. My relationship with Ryan had evolved into a cautious, professional respect. After providing that crucial final evidence against Howard, he'd undergone his own reckoning. Now, heading the finance division under strict oversight, he was working to prove himself on merit rather than family connection. Our weekly meetings were initially strained but gradually became productive, even occasionally friendly. "Quarterly projections look strong," Ryan commented, entering my office for our standing Friday meeting. He looked different now, less polished, more authentic, the artificial Mitchell veneer gradually fading. R&D expenses came in higher than expected, I noted reviewing the reports. But the prototype testing results justify the additional investment. He nodded, then hesitated before asking, "Have you spoken to Ashley lately?" The question caught me off guard. Ashley had been the only Mitchell who hadn't attempted any reconciliation. After the board meeting, she'd publicly aligned herself with Howard and Rebecca, giving interviews portraying herself as the loyal daughter defending her parents against a scheming imposter. "Not since the charity gala last month where she pretended not to see me," I replied. "Why?" Ryan sighed. "Jackson's firm is representing 3 of Father's former associates in their civil suits. Ashley's not taking it well. They're separating." I felt a complicated mixture of emotions, a twinge of sympathy overshadowed by the memory of Ashley planting spyware on my laptop, actively participating in my destruction. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said finally. "But her choices are her own, just as mine were." Ryan nodded, understanding the subtext. "Father's asking to meet with you, by the way. Says it's important." "I'll think about it," I replied noncommittally. I hadn't spoken directly to Howard since the settlement was finalized. After Ryan left, I called the one person who'd stood by me throughout everything. "They never give up, do they?" Marcus said when I told him about Howard's meeting request. Our relationship had deepened during the battle against the Mitchells, evolving from friendship into something more meaningful, though we'd been careful to keep it separate from business matters. "Probably another manipulation attempt," I agreed. "But part of me is curious what he could possibly have to say now." "Just don't go alone," Marcus cautioned. I ultimately decided to meet Howard, but on neutral ground, a private room at the Boston Public Library with my attorney present. He arrived exactly on time, looking older and somehow diminished without the trappings of corporate power surrounding him. "Samantha," he greeted me formally, taking the seat across from me. "Howard," I replied deliberately, not calling him father. He flinched slightly but continued. "I'll be direct. My doctors have given me concerning news. Cardiac issues potentially serious." My attorney tensed, anticipating emotional manipulation. But something in Howard's demeanor seemed genuine for once. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said cautiously. "It's made me reflective," he continued. "I've been reviewing my life's decisions. Not with regret, I still believe I built something significant, but with a clearer understanding of the costs." "Why tell me this?" He met my eyes directly. "Because despite everything, you were my daughter for 28 years. And because you were right about one fundamental thing: success, built on deception, isn't real success." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I recognize what you've accomplished. The innovation division is outperforming projections. The ethical technology initiatives have generated positive press and attracted new investment." He paused. "You're doing well without the Mitchell playbook." I studied him, looking for the manipulation angle, the hidden agenda. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he clarified, seeing my skepticism. "Just acknowledgement that whatever our past, we're now bound by the company's future. Can we establish a professional working relationship going forward?" It wasn't an apology. Howard Mitchell would never truly apologize, but it was perhaps as close as he could come to acknowledging reality. I considered his offer carefully before responding. "We can have a professional relationship focused solely on company matters," I agreed finally. "But understand this, you're not family to me. Charles Westfield is my father. The connection between us is now purely business." He nodded, once accepting the terms. As he rose to leave, he hesitated. "Your biological father, he seems like a good man." "He is," I confirmed. "Then at least I did one thing right," Howard said quietly. "Making sure you were his daughter, not mine." With that cryptic statement, he departed, leaving me wondering if it was one final manipulation or a rare moment of honesty from a man who'd built his life on deception. The healing process extended beyond family dynamics. I'd been working with a therapist specializing in adoption, trauma, and family abuse, gradually processing the complex emotions surrounding my identity and place in the world. The journey wasn't linear. Some days brought clarity and strength, others resurfaced old pain and anger. Thomas Walker, whose evidence had been crucial to my victory, passed away peacefully 2 months after the settlement, having lived to see Howard Mitchell removed from power. I established a foundation in his name to assist long-term service workers facing health crises without adequate insurance, people like Thomas, whom the wealthy often rendered invisible. My relationship with Charles continued to deepen. We discovered shared interests, mannerisms, and thought patterns that transcended our years apart. During one dinner at his new Boston apartment, he showed me photos of my biological mother, Elizabeth. "You have her determination," he said, showing me a picture of a young woman with my smile standing proudly beside a prototype device. "She was brilliant, would have revolutionized medical imaging if she'd lived." "Tell me more about her," I requested, hungry for connections to this woman I would never know. These conversations helped fill the empty spaces in my identity, the questions about where my traits came from, who I resembled, why I approached problems the way I did. The Mitchell household had always treated these questions as irrelevant or inappropriate. Charles embraced them as natural and important. My digital marketing business, which I maintained separately from my corporate role, had not only recovered but expanded. The very public battle with the Mitchells had inadvertently raised my profile, attracting clients who valued integrity and innovation. I made a point of mentoring young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds, helping them build businesses without compromising their values. One evening, hosting a dinner for my closest allies from the battle, Marcus Diana, who had eventually chosen loyalty over fear, Charles, and several others, I realized something profound had shifted within me. The anger and need for vindication that had fueled me for so long had transformed into something more constructive, a vision for building rather than simply surviving. A toast. Charles proposed, raising his glass. "To Samantha, who reminded me that it's never too late to reclaim what's rightfully yours, whether that's a company, a relationship, or your own narrative." As glasses clinked around the table, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since childhood. The Mitchells had tried to define me as useless, as an afterthought, as collateral in their schemes. But in fighting back, I'd defined myself. The dinner party continued late into the evening, filled with laughter and genuine connection. As my guests eventually departed, Marcus stayed behind to help clear the dishes. "You seem different tonight," he observed. "More at peace." I considered his observation. "I think I've finally stopped fighting ghosts. For so long, everything I did was in reaction to them, proving I wasn't what they claimed, showing I could succeed without them demonstrating my worth. Now I'm building something because it's what I want, not because I'm trying to prove them wrong." "That's real freedom," he agreed. Later that night, looking out at the Boston skyline from my new apartment, purchased with my own money in my own name, I reflected on the journey. The Mitchells had asked how it felt being useless. The truth was, I had never been useless. I had been inconvenient. I had been a reminder of their dishonesty, their manipulation, their moral compromises. In the end, the very qualities they had tried to suppress in me, independence, integrity, determination, were what had allowed me to reclaim my rightful place in the world. Not as a Mitchell, but as a Westfield. Not as their creation, but as my own person. I realized then that the most powerful sentence I'd spoken at that fateful dinner wasn't the one about offshore accounts. It was the unspoken declaration that had fueled everything, since I am not what you say I am. And that ultimately is the most liberating truth anyone can discover. What about you? Have you ever had to stand up to family members who underestimated or tried to control you? How did you find the strength to define yourself on your own terms? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to join our community of survivors and thrivers. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, sometimes the family we choose is more powerful than the family we're born or placed into. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.